Hello, all of you in the Eris Nainital. A very, very warm welcome and a very, very good afternoon to all of you. My honor and privilege that Eris Nainital has called me for a webinar and on my favorite topic, that is the atmospheric boundary layer. So probably in the next half an hour or so, I would like to cover up, mostly taking into account that the talk should be educative. And after the half an hour, maybe once you go out of the conference hall, you should know a little bit extra than what you know right now. So I will be switching over to my presentation. There may be some possibility that there can be some time lag, there can be some synchronization problem, and sometimes the slides can be blurred. Let us respect the technology. In any case, I will be sharing my PowerPoint with you right now. It is already posted on my website. I will give a link to all of you. So now I am switching over to my presentation. Please confirm once presentation is seen.
It's visible.
Just confirm whether slides when I am rolling, is it coming?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, there can be some time lag between my presentation and what I'm speaking. So I will cope up with this. So let me, can I start now?
Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay, so as I said today, I am going to discuss on the historical evolution of the atmospheric boundary layer studies, past, present, and future. When I'm presenting through webinar, let us respect that this is the online webinar technology. We all need to mute your mic so that there is no background noise. And let us, I think all of you will be following that. There can be sometimes unavoidable network interruptions, but let us agree that everything cannot go the way as we wish. Sometimes there can be time delay in the appearance of the new slide. So what I have done here is in the bottom of the screen, I have put the slide number. So it will be easy for you to follow up which slide I am talking on. And I will take into account that I will be referring to the slide number. Online appearance, sometimes it can be blurred, but that's why I said that I am going to share the slides with you. It is a new concept, so let us respect this new concept. And let us now go to our talk. Today in my talk, what I planned, the first part, thanks to the organizers they covered, I come from the Indian Space Research Organization, whose main mandate is the launching of the satellites. Out of the 13 to 14 important centers, I come from the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, the lead center. We are the focal points for generation of the launch vehicle. Space Physics Laboratory happens to be a small entity of this VSSC of about 4,000 employees. We are just about 100 employees in SPL. Out of that SPL, I belong to the numerical atmospheric modeling branch. In today's talk, what I decided to do is, I will introduce you the atmospheric boundary layer, which happens to be a fluid dynamics concept. So I will start with fluid dynamics. Then I will go on how this ABL studies evolved, and then later we will go more deep onto the atmospheric boundary layer. Now I'm going to my slide number 4. This may look slightly catchy for you. I hope you are able to see slide number 4. What I have shown here is 3 pictures. One is taken from the rock. What you can see here is a big rock is there, which shows different kind of layers. Another is a birthday cake, which probably you can see different layers are there. If you happen to order for that, they may charge extra money for the toppings. But important thing is you can see different layers very, very clearly. Here I am putting the Republic Day period when the Indian Air Force follows a very beautiful tricolor. But in all these 3 pictures, important thing is the visible boundaries. You can very clearly discriminate one layer to the other layer. But you go a little bit deeper into the fluid dynamics, this layer forms when a solid interacts with a solid and both solids can be discriminated from each other. Or a solid interacts with a liquid, definitely solid and liquid have different properties, then also this layer can be seen. A solid can interact with the gas, then also this kind of compounds. Liquid can interact with liquid, liquid can interact with gas, gas can interact with gas. So important point will be if a fluid is interacting with a solid or another fluid, it leads to the formation of a boundary layer. That means we have to have a fluid which is interacting with some other part which can be solid or probably a liquid or can be a fluid itself. Now, going to my slide number 5. The more common we always hear the atmospheric boundary layer, it is always abbreviated as ABL. This is also a boundary layer. As I said in the previous slide, we have to have a fluid which should interact with a solid or probably a liquid. In the case of atmospheric boundary layer, our atmosphere is a fluid. That is what I showed here. A fluid which is interacting with the underlying surface. That means if you take the atmosphere, what is underlying this particular atmosphere is our Earth. Because of the interaction of these two, we happen to see the atmospheric boundary layer. The question comes is, how do you discriminate, or how do you know it exists? It exists. For that, we need to penetrate a little bit more on the physical chemical properties of this fluid. Definitely the atmosphere, which we define as the fluid, once it comes in contact with the underlying surface, there some kind of reaction starts, and that gets the definition of the atmospheric boundary layer. My slide number 6. If you are appearing in any exams, generally we will be asking the definition. So if you follow the textbook definition, the two definitions which I respect the most, one is from John R. Garrett. He says the layer of air directly above the Earth's surface, in which the effects of the surface, that is the friction, heating or cooling, or probably you can tell the vegetation, are felt directly on time scales less than a day, and in which significant fluxes of momentum, heat or matter are carried by turbulent motions on a scale of the order of depth of boundary layer or less. So what Garrett has done is, he has put little bit more characteristics to that. Firstly, he introduces a time scale, and he says that the interaction time scale should be about a day. That means, for example, if some particular injection is given to you, and if your body responds within 5 minutes, you can say the time scale of response is 5 minutes. There can be some medicines who takes about 12 hours for reacting. So the time scale of the reaction is about 12 hours. In the case of atmospheric boundary, the atmosphere which is interacting with the underlying surface takes approximately 12 hours to 24 hours. This is what makes the atmospheric boundary definition concrete from John R. Garrett. Another colloquial definition from Stull, that is Roland B. Stull, in his famous book, An Introduction to Boundary Layer Meteorology, he says it is that part of the troposphere which is directly influenced by the presence of the Earth's surface. If Earth's surface was not there, probably it will not be responding, but it responds in a time scale of about an hour or less. And these forcings which actually makes the boundary layer to respond include frictional drag, evaporation, transpiration, that is the transpiration means what the plants leaves the water, heat transfer, pollutant emissions, and terrain-induced flow modifications. When I am giving these definitions, let me also mention two important things. John R. Garrett published his book in 1992 with Cambridge University Press, whereas Stull published his first edition in 1988 from Clover Academic Publishers. And if I say that these definitions are taught to us or known to us today, it becomes more important for us to know how these definitions came to this particular level. So I will be taking to little bit historical evolution of this particular definition. So from the textbook definition, I am taking you to the history. My slide number 7. It is a story time, friends. If you happen to see this particular coin, it is a king of Syracuse. His name was King Hero, King Hero II. He ruled the kingdom of Syracuse approximately from 275 BC to 215 BC. He was born in 308 BC and then almost survived up to 15 BC. And once he became the king, he wanted to offer his tribute to the god, because I have got some position. So definitely he was very happy. So what he decided is, he was a very rich king. He said, let me offer a golden crown to the god. So what he did is, he carefully weighed a precise amount of gold and he gave it to the goldsmith, that's Sonar. And then he said, please make a very beautiful crown and give it back to me so that I can offer this golden crown to the god. Second, almost goldsmith spent some time, but ultimately he put all his heart and soul into the golden crown. and he returned excellent, very beautifully looking golden crown with the golden leaves. The king weighed the golden crown and the weight was exactly same as the gold provided by the king. But the real story begins now. There is no story so far. There is a king, he takes the gold, he gives to the goldsmith, and goldsmith makes the crown and gives back. So there is no story here. Story starts now. And what is that story? My slide number 8. Corruption, we always cry that it is killing our country. The possibility of corruption was even sensed in that time. And king suspected that this goldsmith somehow has stolen some of the gold and actually replaced it with the silver. And he has given a mixed one. It is not pure gold. But at the same time, the crown was so beautiful that king doesn't want to lose it. So king said, I believe this crown is not correct. It is impure, but don't destruct this crown and tell me whether it is pure or not. So he called all his ministers and he said, this is the challenge. You should not break the crown. You should not do anything to the crown, but you should tell me whether it is pure gold or not. My slide number 9. Archimedes, by profession, he was a mathematician. He accepted this challenge. And let us not forget, king is telling, that means you cannot take it on the light. So easiest solution would be, this is what king is showing here. My cursor is moving. He said, this is the amount of gold I gave. Is Archimedes here? Archimedes thought, it is very simple. Let us melt this crown. Take the weight. If both are equal, absolutely all right. But definitely you cannot destroy the crown. So two important lessons from that. First is the corruption is not the today's disease. It was there even in 315 BC. But the question is, how do you overcome this particular problem? So when the going gets tough, my slide number 10, it is said when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. Archimedes started thinking very deeply, how should I not destruct the crown, and at the same time I should tell to the king that yes, it is impure. So Archimedes saw that if he takes the weight of the silver and the gold takes less volume, but silver takes more volume. So there was the catch, that there is possibility that we can do that one. My next slide. Eureka, eureka is a very famous words you have heard. So we always say the great ideas come just like that. So what happened with this Archimedes? He went to the bathtub, he was going to take bath, but deeply he was thinking, how should I find out whether the crown was original or not? So the moment he dipped into the bathtub, what he noticed was amount of water poured back outside. The more he went inside, the more water was coming out. And then immediately he shouted that, oh my God, I got the answer. Because he knew that gold and silver have different densities that mass by volume, meaning that if you take a lump of similar size of gold and silver, the lump of gold would be almost double in weight as silver is lighter than gold. So that means from the displaced amount of water, it may be possible to find out whether the silver was added or not. Archimedes proposed this particular concept in 250 BC. Very little he knew that this particular concept was the beginning of the fluid statics, which was going to grow even larger than that what we know today. My next slide number 12, I will go fastly in the history from 250 BC. I will go to the Leonardo da Vinci, the very famous painter. He was in controversy a few years back, those who read the newspapers. For important part, I am highlighting two of the pictures by him. He was a very great artist. He will see the things. He has even drawn the Mona Lisa portrait very nicely. But important two prospects what I'm showing is he happened to see a very severe flood which immersed almost all his village. He noticed a particular feature of the flood. The left hand side, he saw if a gutter water is going to the canal, it becomes swirly in like this. And the swirls were almost in proportion with the flow. He did not know what is all this, but he has drawn very nicely this particular picture. In the same way, depending on the building, I am sorry this picture may not be clear, but depending on the building size, if the fluid is flowing in different velocity, he has postulated that a floody village may look something like this. This was done in 1452 to 1519. At that time, he did not know what he is depicting in this particular picture is going to be referred forever in the history. Today's date, if we take this picture, immediately a fluid dynamics person will say, there is the concept of fluid dynamics. There is the concept of turbulence. There is the concept of eddy. But he didn't know in 1452 or 1519. Now I will go a little bit more ahead. Whatever we postulated was still remaining in the kind of religious theory where a person talks to the other without going into the mathematics part. It was Sir Isaac Newton who proposed Principia Mathematica. The first time the physics was amalgamated with the mathematics, and he postulated his famous equations and famous laws. In 1687, he proposed that whatever we happen to see follow some kind of physical rules. And these physical rules can always be solved by some mathematical equations. That means mathematics and physics cannot go separately. They should go hand in hand. And he put forward few equations, which included a kind of differential equation, which means that if a quantity is changing with respect to time, you should be able to find out the gradient. It was the famous Principia Mathematica, which completely shook the physical science, mathematical science, and rest of the science. If I go a little bit ahead, hope you are able to see my slide number 14. Bernoulli, who took up from this Newton's law, this is a very, very famous Bernoulli's theorem, which you might have read in your school time. The gist of this one is, if you take a pipe and if you look into the flow, if the diameter of the pipe is made small, the velocity becomes larger, and the diameter of pipe is made larger, the velocity becomes smaller. Little Bernoulli knew, but he knew that this need to be linked with the energy. So he linked it with pressure energy, kinetic energy. Ultimately, the density and volume of the fluid started coming into the equation. This was the foundation which was gradually coming in isolation, but it was getting clear that whenever you want to study a fluid, you need to study the mathematics. You also need to study what kind of energy is related with this particular fluid. My next slide, number 15. It was further taken up by two great scientists. One was D'Alembert and second was Euler. If I quote Euler, he said that since the fabric of the universe is most perfect, whatever you see, it is the perfect, it is the creation of the creator. Nothing at all takes place in the universe in which some rule of maximum or minimum does not appear. It is so surprising that including all the kings of BC, AC, they knew minimum, they knew maximum. If king is possessing the property, if it is maximum, a poor man will be possessing the minimum. But in the physics concept also, the concept of minima and maxima cannot be kept in isolation. Going to slide number 16. I add one more person, that is the Euler, D'Alembert and Bernoulli. These three scientists actually took up from what Newton proposed, and they shook the complete foundation of the 18th century. So 18th century, the mathematicians, physicians, and those who are interested in field experiments started shaking hands with each other, and they started saying that if there is something unknown, we need to know it. And they also know that there is nothing coincidence that it has to go that way, but it is having some principles behind that. Only the problem is we do not know that. They did not have that kind of resources, but they knew that there are something which is forcing all these things to happen the way it happens. Whether it is the fluid, whether it is the flood, whether it is the atmosphere. So, going to slide number 17. That is 18th century to 19th century, people understood that if you want to study one particular fluid, or let me say if you want to study the behavior of a body, as Newton said, it will not move unless you put one external force. That means if you know external force, you can translate what is the acceleration. That makes the first law of the Newton's second law which says force is equal to mass into acceleration. It is so simple as I say. If you are imposing some force on somebody, if mass is large, acceleration will be small. And if mass is small, acceleration will be larger. But if I take the right hand side mass into acceleration, and if I start dividing into different parts, for a fluid, it can be gravitational force, it can be pressure gradient force, it can be Coriolis force, it can be frictional force. So ultimately people started finding out which are all the forces which derives this fluid. They ended up with probably 4, and they said there may be some more probable forces. If you take up any fluid dynamics book even today, the problem in the fluid dynamics or the problem with the Navier-Stokes equation is known is half, unknown is half. Till today, we do not have an analytical solution for that. But this Navier-Stokes equation was proposed independently by Navier in 1822 and almost 25 years later by Stokes. Today we know Navier-Stokes equation. The equation, which was a theoretical buildup of the fluid dynamics, was proposed in 1845. Till date, we struggled how to solve it. But important point in the evolution of this one was, this was attempted by Euler. But Euler ignored the viscosity term. Viscosity, for example, if you take a fluid, one is water, and let me say you take one mother gel, maybe like Fevicol. Fevicol is having more viscosity. Water doesn't have viscosity. Water will fall down immediately, but Fevicol will not fall down. Same as oil will not fall down. So this particular concept was ignored by Euler. Ultimately, Navier and Stokes, they took it up and they decided that let us put the equations. But the problem for the current generation scientists, my slide number 18, as the equation looks extremely complex, it was very difficult to get a solution. People were really frustrated to solve this Navier-Stokes equation. Till today, if a student is asked to go to the blackboard and asked to write the solution, it becomes a very big painful event. But the inability to solve the Navier-Stokes equation was really creating problems to the fluid dynamics people. Because if you want to study anything of the fluid interaction with the soil lid, they need to solve this Navier-Stokes equation. And the 20th century started with the frustration that we do not know how to solve this Navier-Stokes equation. Slide number 19. That particular time, there were two famous brothers, Wright brothers, which we call Orville Wright and Wilbur Wright. They were doing all kind of experiments to fly the small aircraft in such a way that it takes some little bit lift and it finally comes down in a smooth way. The big problem what they were facing is when they make the wings and when they designed the wings, they were unable to know what should be the drag, and that was because this particular Navier-Stokes equation, they did not have a solution to this particular things. But on 17th December 1903, they succeeded. So they succeeded in the flight. At that time, Navier-Stokes equation was still not solved. With this foundation and background, there was a scientist, humble scientist, whose name was Ludwig Prandtl. Almost 1 year before, actually, our Wright brothers could try, he was also working as a very genuine professor, 29 years of age. He was given an opportunity to present his paper in a seminar. Seminar was conducted in Germany. So what you see on the left hand side is the Ludwig Prandtl. On the right hand side, you happen to see his experimental setup. Let me try to spend just 1 minute on this experimental setup. As my cursor is moving on the bottom side, I hope you may be able to see there. This was his experimental setup. He put up a cycle wheel here. This was a kind of bathtub. Bathtub was divided into 2 equal portions with some kind of plate. So he poured everything with the water. And if he runs his bicycle wheel with the paddle, the fluid will go like this, completely like this. Then he put some copper abrupt kind of sheets, so he can actually examine how these copper sheets are going. And taking the photographs of these copper sheets, he did this experiment. He was given 10 minutes of time for presentation of his results. My slide number 21. On the right hand side, one of the pictures shown by him in 1904, this is the solid which actually was the tank coverage which was bisecting the fluid. What he showed is the fluid flow varies with the height. That means from the point where the body is touching, the fluid varies, the fluid velocity varies. So he postulated there should be a layer which is formed as an interaction of a solid with a fluid. Second important point, the velocity of this fluid should be the function of the height from this particular surface. These two important findings he presented in merely 10 minutes. Let us not forget 1904. And then, till today, if I take the modern world of aerodynamics and the fluid dynamics, my slide number 22, it is still dominated by this Prandtl's idea, and by all the rights, this gentleman was worth a Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, he never got this Nobel Prize. People say the Nobel Committee was reluctant to award the prize for accomplishments in classical physics. And let me mention, Ludwig Prandtl never ever used the word boundary layer. He only used the word layer. He was bit down to earth and he was reluctant to show that I have discovered something great kind of things. So he used a very simple layer. One or two times he used the word boundary layer. His students took up, they followed this particular work, and they said that there is a layer which can be probably called as the boundary layer, which behaves different from the other layers. So going ahead, 1904 started, and 1915, 1920, ultimately the world ended up with a race. That was a race between USSR, which we call Russia, and America. And this race was who will go to moon first, who will become the astronaut first. So the priorities of the scientific community was decided by the politicians. And they said, keep all things aside and give priority that we should reach to the first. We should be first to reach the moon. And in this race, majority of important scientific discoveries, like Ludwig Prandtl's, it gradually went to the cool bag. In this background, my slide number 24, the boundary layer work gradually went ahead of the seminal presentation. And as I'm going to show, I'm going to put my cursor here. The most simplest definition given by Prandtl was, if you take the velocity of the fluid u, it should be the function of z from where the fluid starts. The other terms were he added up later. This u star, actually we call the friction velocity. K, which I'm going to talk a little bit later, is called a constant. Z0 is roughness length. Even though there was a shortcut, I can say that competition between the USSR as well as America, but the fluid dynamics gradually was focusing more to the equations, and this term was taking more realistic way. Then came my slide number 25. World War II came and attacked the entire world. It was the World War II which completely destructed the science. And in that particular time, Obukhov was a famous Russian scientist. They do not speak English, so he was working on a fluid dynamics problem. And he ultimately communicated one paper to a Russian journal. The title of that paper was Turbulence in an Atmosphere with a Non-Uniform Temperature. If I call this paper was very special, I also say that this paper was very unfortunate. Why unfortunate? In 1943, at the age of 25, Obukhov finished this paper. He presented, it was accepted, but unfortunately because of the lack of the fund, very limited issues came out and his work literally was not circulated as it should be. And let us not forget, that time it was not possible to duplicate or take the Xerox kind of things. So even though it was published in 1946, because of the obvious reasons due to the World War II, this was not expanded beyond that one. Further to that, my slide number 26, Obukhov's student, Monod, he started working on that one. And if I take the crux of this particular paper, which he presented in 1946, he mentioned, I go back to the previous one, if you take this equation, he mentioned that the velocity of the fluid should also be a function of one other parameter L and probably one function psi. This was the main contribution by Obuco. This is what crux I am mentioning here. So the extension of this work was taken over by Obuco, and Obuco ultimately said that if I define L, which is going to be the Obuco length, which we call today, but that time he said definition of L is L. He said it should be function of your parameters in the fluid dynamics. And more important, next to that, when we take MO similarity theory, Monin added to that, and he said whatever results Obuco, that means his guru, found, it is not one particular location dependent. If you do this kind of experiment anywhere in the world, they were following a very, very similar behavior. That is why this theory, today's date, we get to know, we say it is the similarity theory. Monin, Obuco similarity theory. But important thing, neither Monin nor Obuco said that is the similarity theory. Second part, Obuco was the first person who said there should be a length. Monin took over, he was a student. Today's date we know MO similarity theory. Monin is known as the first, but actually it was the Obuco. Now my slide number 28. Being in this field, if somebody asks me what is the best figure anytime you have ever appreciated, this particular figure. What you happen to see is the year 1970 to approximately 2000. On the right hand side, we call it kappa. That kappa is nothing but the von Karman constant. Von Karman discovered it. He said a constant. Today's date, we call it von Karman constant. This is von Karman constant. People have done a lot of experiments starting from 1970. But look at that. This von Karman constant is as robust as it was in 1970. That was the beauty of this von Karman. And that was the outburst of Monin-Obuco similarity theory. This equation sometimes might look very boring, but I like them very much because if you know the history of the science, you will appreciate this once and for all. Going to my next slide, as Ludwig Prandtl, who happened to propose this theory, he was gradually getting older here. You can see that is Ludwig Prandtl, his colleague Dreiben. This is the person von Karman who was in military, and their colleague Thyssen. Von Karman was working in association with these scientists. Prandtl was becoming very old, and one day finally he was admitted to the hospital, and he knew that he is going to die. But one thing he said, that if anything is complex, you should always look for a simple solution. He never believed that a theory will exist if it is complex. Simplify it. He did that. And after his death in 1955, in his memory, the Association of Fluid Dynamics started giving a Prandtl ring. The first person who received this person was von Karman, who said, I regard it as a great honor that I have been chosen to be the first recipient of Ludwig Prandtl ring. Prandtl's influence was decisive for my scientific development, and I always remember him with gratitude and reverence. This is what von Karman mentioned. Going to the next slide. This is my last but one slide. If I am asked to summarize how this atmospheric boundary layer definition, which I proposed in the very first few slides. Part number one, Ludwig Prandtl, he gave a seminar presentation in 1905. Important lesson to be taken from this paper, he was given 10 minutes time. And when the proceedings came out, almost after 14 years later, Goldstein, it is not the Herbert Goldstein of your classical mechanics, it was a senior Goldstein, he questioned Prandtl, you are so excellent work, but why did you publish only 8 pages? He replied, I was given 10 minutes, sir, so I thought I should not write more than 8 pages. That was down to earth Prandtl. Second, Obuco, he was a Russian scientist. He proposed his theory. He took 3 years to get it published. Despite publishing in a good journal of Russia, his work was unknown for more than one decade. It was only when 1951, after the World War II, when Monin took up this particular work, almost 20 years, the theory became Monin-Obuko similarity theory, which we know today. Next to that, which I did not touch upon here, 1955, Charnock, another famous scientist, he took up this work and he said that there should be one constant introduced for definition of the fluid dynamics. Among all the 5 papers which I mentioned here, in all the sense they were actually the first of its kind. But believe me, take out these papers, not even one author quoted that this was the first of its kind. They did not say, and rest is the history. And dear friends, this is how the concept of boundary layer evolved, and today's our knowledge and our definition, what we know, is contribution of all these great scientists, which I say were really great, but they never claimed to be. So with this, I would like to stop my presentation. This is the time of Corona. I hope you all are taking extra precautions to be safe. So this is my last slide, and I may like to open up the forum for discussion. So I am closing my presentation and I will come to the video mode. So this is the ABCD of Corona. I am going to share my soft copy. It is already available on my personal website. That is https://subramanyam.bibli.com. Thanks a lot for your patience. Now we will go to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balasubramanian.
Yes.
A very nice talk. Questions, please.
You may unmute your mic once you are seeking a question, posing a question.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
Yeah, Bala, this is Manish here.
Hi Manish, how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine.
You remember we sailed together in IndoX?
Yeah.
Yeah, please tell.
Yeah, I just wanted to have, for the benefit of everyone, like just a very general query, because we are in the mountain region.
Yes.
So about the typical question we have in our mind about the boundary layer in the mountain region. Of course, generally we talk on boundary layer in the plain, that is fine. When we have in the altitude of around say 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer, so how, like whether boundary layer we always say above that surface layer or surface of the mountain. What about if suppose mountain is around 5 kilometer, 6 kilometer or Mount Everest, whether we see the similar kind of boundary layer? So maybe you can touch upon in this line.
Yeah, Manish, it's a good question. See, when we talk about the mountains or probably a hilly region, what happens is the fluid which is coming from all the places around. Probably like if I say that this is my mountain approximately this much tall, and the surrounding region is very, very flat kind of things. So fluid doesn't take any obstacles here. But once the fluid comes over here, at particularly like Nainital, which is also a hilly terrain, already your mean sea level itself, you are almost on the top of 2.2 kilometers. So what happens at this particular surface is fluid is forcefully interacting with the terrain. So the behavior of the fluid, what you happen to see, will be forced due to the topography. And second thing is this fluid, which is probably coming approximately 100 to 200 meters above, will show the characteristics of the boundary layer. So if you ask me what should be the boundary layer at hilly terrain, response to that will be if you are defining the boundary layer from the surface, probably 2 to 300 meters you may get it. If you compare it with the adjoining grid points approximately 200 kilometers away, where your actual surface itself is about 100 meters, you may say that I am staying above the boundary layer. Actually, it is not so. You are always staying within the boundary layer, because the definition of the boundary layer says that it is the layer which starts from the surface and goes above. So once you yourself are about 2.2 kilometers above the mean sea level, your boundary layer starts from that and goes as long as the use and U star follow this Obuco similarity theory. I hope I made it clear.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, please, Pankaj.
My name is Pankaj, and
Yes.
I work in astronomy, so I don't know much about this boundary layer.
Yeah.
What I want to ask about the two definitions, the timeline are quite different, right? The Garrett says 1 day within a day, and then the
Yeah.
second definition talk about few hours. So I don't get the both. I mean, how do you reconcile the both? Or is it talking
Okay.
completely different physical quantity which behaves in a completely different scale?
Okay, let me answer to this. See, when you happen to see a fluid, for example, if I am saying that I am putting one incense stick agarbatti in my room, the perfume of that agarbatti probably may come to me probably in few minutes or probably in few hours. But it is the concept of few minutes. Immediately you start sniffing that one. In the same way, when our earth is completely revolving around that, it takes 24 hours from one place to go back to the same place. In this 24 hours, sun rises, sun sets, moon rises, moon sets. So the 12-hour cycle, when we are exposed to the sun, that is called the heating period. And the other 12 hours in the night time, which is called the cooling period. So this heating period influences the atmosphere. And this atmosphere responds to this forcing from 1 to 2 hours to approximately 12 hours. That is why the definition says that the time scale is typically few hours to probably half a day kind of things. That means if I am talking of little bit middle atmospheric phenomena, for example, gravity waves, or you can say the Rossby waves or any other waves, where the time scales associated is more than a week. In that comparison, this atmospheric boundary responds in few hours to probably half a day or 1 day kind of things. So that is why today's date, we always say time scale associated with the boundary layer should be probably few hours to probably half a day. And second thing is the fluxes which we are calculating, they should be constant. So that is what today's understanding on that. I hope I made it clear.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, Subbu. Are you able to listen me? This is
Yes,
Narendra
yes,
from
I can
Aries.
listen. Right.
If you remember, we have met a number of times.
Yeah.
It was
I
really
remember. Yes.
interesting talk, and very nicely you portrayed that story of how we came to know what boundary layer is.
Yeah. Thank
And
you.
actually, I mean, I have at many occasions some sort of curiosity to know that whenever we talk about this Monin-Obuchov length L,
Yeah.
this is expressed in terms of negative, and then of course all sort of
Yes.
atmospheric parameter, including your
Yes.
tension,
Yes.
temperature, frictional velocity. So all these
Yeah.
components come in, but then it becomes
Yeah.
kind of what I mean to say is that how do we physically understand it, that what in terms of atmospheric boundary layer, so-called, maybe later it is used
Yeah.
sometime in instability of the atmosphere also we use Z by L. So this
Yeah.
length scale L
Yeah.
basically how physically, or how the physical significance of this can be understood in a very simple way, like you have been
Correct.
trying to explain.
Okay, let me respond to that. See, when we say the normal height, it is
Right.
very easily understandable. For example, if I'm talking, my pen is approximately 6 inch. I can
Correct.
see that this is my 6 inch pen actually. And if anybody wants to find out that this is my pen, which is the height of the pen is approximately 6 inch. But assume that this pen is fluctuating, for example, a fluid, which comes down sometimes and which goes above like that.
Okay.
So the length of this particular device, which can probably come down, come up. So then we need to relate this particular with the kind of mechanism which in our atmospheric boundary layer we call the buoyancy. Buoyancy
Right.
tries to lift it up. Pressure gradient force tries to lift it up. But at the same time, gravity tries to pull it down.
Down.
So if you have two particular forces, one is dominating the other, then definitely there is a kind of tug of war which fellow will take over. So to define this one, what Obuco similarity theory says that to take absolute length and divide it by this sharing term which we say L. So we get a new term Z by L. And this Z by L becomes negative and positive. Negative means one force is dominating and positive means other force is dominating. And when we say Z by L is negative, that means your buoyancy is dominating on the top side. So all the fluid which is going above, it is going. So we say atmosphere is become unstable. On the other way around, in the night time, when this L becomes kind of positive, it is coming down. It's trying to shrink. So that is why we try to put a scaling length. Another reason for defining the scaling length like U star, theta star, and Q star is if you are postulating a fluid, somebody else wants to refer it, and somebody else wants to create the same kind of atmosphere in his place, he should not use the absolute length. He should use the scaling length. Scaling length says U star at what intervals the wind speed may be exponentially growing. That is why we always use the word scaling length. That is put with star. So that is why even though it is complex, but once you follow that, Z by L, which can be negative. It is not that negative length means length is going down or something like that. But we are representing two forces and we are trying to tell whether this one is dominating or the other one is dominating. That is how Z by L came into existence, which says unstable versus stable. Hope I made it clear.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm Kumar here. I just have one question. What is the influence of this lunar cycle on this boundary layer? Does it get disturbed just like the tides and in the ocean?
Yes, actually, a good question. I have come across one, not only a paper, in fact, a book, which states how this lunar atmosphere is influencing the atmosphere. Atmosphere, when that says, it is the troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, all things are involved into that, right? So initially it was assumed that whether it is lunar tides or maybe the gravitational tides, they probably may not be influencing the boundary layer. But being a modeler, when we try to model this atmospheric boundary layer, we define two terms. One is L, which I defined as the Obuco length, and second is the buoyancy term, which we call the mixed length scale. So in this mixed length scale, we used to take into account of the external forces, which includes the lunar tide. But at the same time, let me also mention that the influence of this on the boundary layer can be literally negligible. You can approximately say that there was no influence, because time scale should not be very, very large kind of things.
Okay. Subbu, I have one more query. I mean, I just wish to learn that there are number of boundary layer models people have been using globally. I mean, some of the groups, they are writing their own small models and then trying to predict and evaluate models with the observations. And then of course there are well-established models like WRF and many other maybe regional models, which all basically produce kind of a boundary layer. So I mean, I would seek your suggestion that if you want to utilize a particular model for the studies related to the Himalayan, mountainous terrain. So then what model would you suggest that we should, basically utilize?
Naran, this is a very tricky question. Let me answer to that. If you take WRF, if you take MM5, if you take ARPS, if you take ICON, GME, all the global models, regional models, their framework depends on the governing equations of atmosphere. There are 6 governing equations. So if you take
basic equations are same.
Yes, equations remain the same. So the question comes is why the different names? So the different names are there because the initial condition of the atmosphere which you are providing, that changes from model to model. In generally, we will be using satellite data, we will be using the radio sound data, we will be using the Doppler weather radar, all kind of radars. So all the observational in situ measurements are put up. Initial conditions can change. Only the problem is, if you call ICON, if you call different kind of initial conditions might have gone. Second important thing is what is the grid resolution? If you are talking of a grid resolution of 20 kilometers today,
Right.
That means you should talk anything of 20 kilometers, not in between. Your
Right.
model will never be accurate in between 20 kilometers because
Right.
your grid size itself is 20 kilometers. So in that area, particularly like Himalayan region, unfortunately, the hill and the slope are so sharp kind of things.
It changed within
that
200 meter.
Correct. For example, if you are going from your mall road to some other place, almost 100-meter difference comes. So
Right.
in these kind of processes, we try to parameterize. So this parameterization of the boundary layer process and subgrid scales processes, we are trying to improve day by day. So that will lead to a improved one. That much I can guarantee that whether you take one model or the second model or the third model, the terms and conditions is know what is the grid resolution. Second, know your initial conditions. If you are not provided the initial conditions properly, it will not give very good results. Third,
Correct.
lateral boundary conditions. Lateral boundary conditions means if you are running the model only for Himalayan region, you cannot keep in isolation that something from the north or something from the south may be
Will
intruding.
not be coming.
You will
Right.
need to incorporate that, right? And the last but not the least is no model will give any physics. It will give the numbers. So
Right.
we have to attribute that numbers and call. For example, cyclone is coming. I do not know model will tell or not, but when I look into the parameters, when I look into the pressure drop, I should infer that, yeah, it is a cyclone. So that is where the modelers should put their intuition to understand the data and further put to the audience.
That's great. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Any more questions?
Hello, sir. I'm Jaideep, and thanks for your nice talk. So basically, you talk about the Monin-Avico similarity theory, which is based on the Buckingham-Pi theorem. So
Yeah.
basically, whatever I read about the boundary layer, that Monin-Avico similarity theory is only applicable to the near surface layer, right? The surface layer, not for the complete boundary layer.
Yes.
So is that applicable also for the complete mixing layer height, means whatever we call at 1 kilometer or 2
No.
kilometer? Or is it applicable only for the 100 meter, that layer of the atmosphere which is highly influenced by the surface, because the logarithmic profile of the wind is only observed in the surface 100 meter or 200 meter up to?
Correct. See, you answered partly to your own question. First thing is right is this Obuco similarity theory, Monin-Obuco similarity theory. They did it with the constant flux layer, which we call the surface layer. Surface flux layer is the layer where our fluxes of momentum, heat, and moisture do not change by more than 10%. So as you are going above and you are trying to extract the profiles, probably at 100 to 150 meters and above, these profiles do not follow the logarithmic fashion. It will become kind of linear. So MO similarity theory is confined to this surface layer. Okay. So you cannot apply this Obuco similarity theory for the higher altitudes. So it is confined to this particular things. But importance of this Monin-Obuco similarity theory is this surface layer, or I can say the lowest part of the atmosphere, almost consumes 40 to 50% of the energy. That is very, very huge kind of things. So accurate information on the fluxes we need to get, we have to depend on this similarity theory. That is why this is extremely important and at the same time essential in the fluid dynamics.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Questions? If there are no more questions, then let's thank Dr. Balasubramaniam for a very lucid talk. So we hope to hear you again sometime later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We can't clap.
It's my
but
pleasure.
I can just clap for everybody else.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, let's call it and have a nice day.
Okay. Thank you, Subbu. Thank you so
See you.
much.